She didn't ask for a stage. She only asked for the seat her name was printed on. But in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by applause and crystal chandeliers, Simone Ellison felt something she hadn't felt in years not. Anger, not even surprise. Just that old, familiar sting of being both essential and invisible. They welcomed her donation. They celebrated her impact. But when she showed up in person, they couldn't recognize the very woman who helped build the room. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about how quiet dignity can dismantle an entire system without ever raising its voice. A story about the weight of silence, the cost of being overlooked, and what happens when someone chooses to stay. Not to be accepted, but to hold the room accountable simply by refusing to leave it. Now, let's get started. The invitation had arrived folded in thick cream cardstock, with the hospital's insignia embossed in silver at the top. Simone Ellison had stared at it for a long moment that morning, letting her fingers run along the edge, half expecting it to vanish. It looked more like something designed for a state senator than for a third-year internal medicine resident. But there it was her name printed in ink, unmistakable. It wasn't the first time she'd been invited to a Harrington Medical Center gala, but this one was different. This wasn't a fundraiser for medical research or a volunteer appreciation dinner. This was the annual Founders Circle Gala, held once a year for the elite donors, board members, and high-ranking staff. A night when power dressed in cufflinks and legacy wore sequins. And tonight, they were honoring those who had gone beyond duty in service and impact. Simone had almost laughed when she read that phrase. If saving the CEO's son from cardiac arrest on the cold linoleum of the ER hallway wasn't going beyond duty, she didn't know what was. But she hadn't been invited because of that. Not really. She'd been invited because Malcolm had submitted an anonymous donation last year, under their shared foundation name enough to fund the purchase of a new trauma response cart system for the pediatric wing. And now, someone upstairs had finally connected the dots. They wanted to honor the Ellison Fund. They just didn't realize it was her. Not yet. Her husband, Malcolm, was running late. Parent-teacher conference night at Dunbar Middle School had gone long, and she'd told him she'd meet him at the venue. "Don't let them seat you before I get there," he'd said, laughing. But she had. And now, she regretted it. The Harrington Grand Hall was a swirl of candlelight and whispered ambition. Glasses clinked with curated indifference, violins hummed in the background, and laughter sounded expensive. Simone stood just inside the entryway, heart steady but jaw tight, waiting her turn at the registration table. The woman checking names white, mid-30s, glossy hair, pearl earrings gave her a glance and asked, "Are you with catering or floral?" Simone blinked. "I'm a guest. Dr. Simone Ellison." "Oh." The woman's smile faltered for a split second. She tapped the iPad in front of her, then hesitated. Let me double-check." Simone said nothing, just waited. Another woman leaned over and whispered something. The first one nodded slightly, then glanced up again. "Yes, of course. Table 7, she said, pressing the screen a little too quickly. "It's near the back wall, just past the volunteer station." Simone's brows twitched. "That's not the table listed in the invitation." "I'm sorry?" the hostess asked, all customer service charm. "My invitation listed table 7 by the central garden atrium. That was confirmed." The woman's smile stiffened. "Oh, I'm sure it was a mistake. That table is usually reserved for department chairs and donors." Simone's eyes didn't move. "I am a donor." A flicker of something passed through the woman's gaze. Embarrassment? Doubt? It didn't matter. "I'll have someone walk you over," she said, waving to a young man in a black vest who looked about as confident as a leaf in a windstorm. Simone followed him in silence, her heels clicking against polished marble floors that seemed to echo just a little louder than everyone else's. Heads didn't exactly turn, but there was a kind of awareness in the era shift, a static as she moved through the room. The table she was led to wasn't in the center, or even by the wall of glass overlooking the hospital's sculpture garden. It was tucked just beside the hallway leading to the kitchen behind a pillar, half-shaded, barely within range of the string quartet's sound. Simone sat anyway, back straight, hands resting lightly on the linen napkin in her lap. Her place card wasn't there. "Is there a menu?" she asked the staffer, voice calm. He blinked. "I'll go check." She nodded once. "Thank you." She was already taking mental notes, subtle things. Which tables received champagne pours first, who got escorted in versus waved along, how the staff's tone shifted with each introduction. It was a familiar pattern. She'd seen it at medical conferences, alumni galas, even faculty mixers. The unspoken sorting system. Who mattered, who didn't, who got seen, who got mistaken. Across the room, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Frederick Thomas, head of neurosurgery, being seated with his wife, a petite blonde in a diamond-sleeved dress. He barely glanced in Simone's direction. It was just as well. They'd worked on a case together 6 months ago. He'd complimented her charting but never remembered her name. A couple passed her table. The man looked down for a split second, then leaned in to whisper to his date. "That's probably the new diversity hire." The woman gave a tight smile, as if they'd just confirmed something unfortunate but expected. Simone exhaled slowly through her nose. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But she was awake, alert in the way a person becomes after the 100th paper cut, sharp in places no one sees. She didn't need them to know who she was. She only needed them to realize they had missed something. Something important. Her phone buzzed. "Malcolm. Almost there. Don't move. I'm parking." She replied with one word. "Seated." 3 dots danced for a moment, then nothing. It was okay. She folded her phone shut and turned her attention to the room, watched the body language, the choreography of access and assumption, the quiet power, the soft erasure. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way. Until a moment later, when a young woman in a slate blue gown stepped to the mic at the front of the room and said, "We'd like to begin our acknowledgments tonight with someone very special, someone whose generosity this past year made our new pediatric wing upgrade possible." Simone sat a little straighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host continued, "please join me in recognizing the anonymous donor known only as the Ellison Fund." Applause rippled, polite and non-committal. No one looked at Simone. The woman smiled and said, "We don't know who you are, but thank you. You've helped change lives." And just like that, the room returned to its meal. Simone picked up her glass, took a slow sip of flat water, and smiled to herself, not out of pride, not out of irony, but out of something deeper. Resolve. Because while the room applauded a name they didn't know, they had no idea that the woman they'd misplaced, minimized, and misjudged was the reason this entire event was possible. And she wasn't done yet. Malcolm arrived 7 minutes later. Simone heard his footsteps before she saw him, steady, measured, deliberate, the kind of walk that said he already knew something was wrong. He scanned the room. Tall frame dressed in a navy suit with sleeves just slightly wrinkled from the steering wheel. He'd tied his tie in the mirror of the staff lounge before leaving school. The knot wasn't perfect, but he was. His eyes found hers instantly, and then he saw where she was sitting. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just stood there, 2 feet past the entrance, taking it in. The white linen table half-shadowed by the pillar, the distance from the center of the room, the way no one made eye contact as they passed her, and he walked toward her slowly, not in a rush like a man trying to remember every detail so he wouldn't forget what it felt like to watch someone he loved be made invisible. She met him with a glance that said, "Don't, not yet." So he sat beside her, straightening his jacket as he did. "Menu?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Apparently they're rare tonight." He looked around. From where they sat, he could see the main table, the one near the stage, bathed in warm light, where board members and donors toasted one another with glasses of Veuve Clicquot. Dr. Thomas sat there, So did the hospital's CFO, Beverly Chen, who had once called Simone eloquent for a resident after a conference presentation. Malcolm leaned closer, voice low. Was this the table they assigned you? No. Her tone was neutral. It was the one they reassigned me. He nodded, jaw tightening. Neither of them moved. At the head table, someone laughed a little too loudly. Across the room, a waiter with a tray of oysters bypassed their table entirely. Simone watched it all. Watched the way the room moved around her like she was part of the architecture, not the guest list. She wasn't angry, not in the explosive sense, but something in her had begun to harden, a quiet calcification of something already strained. Because this wasn't new, this was remembered. It was her first clinical rotation at Langford Memorial when a nurse had mistaken her for transport staff and handed her a gurney slip. It was the time she'd been paged to the ER, only to be questioned by security because her badge photo didn't look like her. It was her first apartment tour after med school when the leasing agent had said, "This building tends to favor quieter tenants." It was always the same erasure, just dressed in different outfits. Tonight it wore pearls and practiced smiles. Malcolm reached for her hand beneath the table. His palm was warm, grounding. "You okay?" he asked. Simone nodded once. "I'm just cataloging." He didn't ask what. He knew. Their server arrived finally. A young man with a tablet and the kind of nervous energy that came from realizing he'd already messed up. "I apologize for the delay," he said, placing 2 menus down with trembling fingers. "The kitchen's a bit out of sync tonight." Simone thanked him with a quiet nod. The server hesitated before walking away. He looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe he recognized her. Maybe not. Either way, he didn't speak. He left. They ordered roasted salmon for Malcolm, truffle risotto for Simone. They weren't really hungry. Across the room, a new group of guests entered 2 men in tuxedos with silver beards and a woman in a floor-length black gown. One of them pointed toward the center table. They were greeted by a hospital administrator and ushered in immediately. One of the men glanced their way, then quickly looked away. Simone turned her gaze toward the garden beyond the glass wall. Wisteria hung like silence from the trellis beams, swaying in the wind. It looked peaceful from a distance. But she knew those vines they wrapped tight around whatever they clung to, choking light from the spaces underneath. "I should have pushed back," Malcolm said suddenly. "You didn't know, but I should have expected it." Simone shook her head. "Expecting it doesn't make it easier." He said nothing after that. There was nothing to say. Minutes passed. A speech began. A slide presentation lit up the main screen. Highlights of the hospital's outreach programs. Images of smiling nurses. Diversity statements in large serif fonts. Simone watched herself not appear. Not in the photos. Not in the credits. Not even in the list of award nominees. And yet, her name, the Ellison Fund, was there, listed anonymously beneath the platinum sponsors. A round of applause followed. Then silence. Then wine. She stirred her risotto without eating it. The room around her pulsed with the same rhythm it always had. Exclusion disguised as excellence, hierarchy masquerading as celebration. And she couldn't stop hearing the voice of the hostess earlier, saying, "That table's for senior doctors and donors." She was both. And yet, she was seated by the kitchen. The absurdity was so thick, it almost became funny. Almost. A voice startled her. "Excuse me." It came from a woman standing just behind her table, mid-30s, well-dressed in emerald green with perfect posture and a badge that read, "Hospital Communications." "I just wanted to thank you for attending," she said to Simone, smiling politely. Simone met her eyes. "You're welcome." The woman looked down at the table, paused. "Oh, this table isn't usually—" She didn't finish the sentence. Simone didn't help her. There was a silence then, sharp, glinting like broken glass. Then Malcolm leaned forward, voice smooth and deliberate. Is there something wrong with this table? The woman blinked. No, I just was surprised to see... She trailed off again. You were surprised to see us here, he said. No, yes, but not in a bad way, I just... Simone held up a hand. It's fine. You can go. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Right. Of course. Enjoy your evening. She left. Malcolm looked at his wife. Do you want to leave? No, Simone said softly. I want to remember this. He tilted his head. Why? Because if I ever start to believe I imagined the lines, this will remind me they're real. Malcolm nodded, slowly. That's the most doctor thing I've ever heard. She almost smiled. Their plates were cleared, half-eaten. No one asked how the food was. Another speech? Another toast? More applause? The lights dimmed slightly as dessert was served. Simone looked around. There were maybe a dozen black people in the room. 2 were valets. 1 was managing the audio board. 3 more were staff. 1 was an attending from surgery she didn't know well. None of them were seated at the front. She thought of every patient she'd held through seizures. Every night she'd gone over labs twice because the first diagnosis didn't feel right. Every time she'd advocated for someone without insurance, fought insurance, wrote letters of appeal, or stayed late because a family needed more time to understand. And now she was here, beside the service door, being thanked anonymously. It wasn't rage that filled her. It was something colder, more precise. Conviction. The quiet kind. The kind that made people mistake you for passive until they realized you were the one holding the foundation up. A commotion near the entry pulled her from her thoughts. People were turning. Whispers spread. Simone turned her head, and then she saw it. A man in a charcoal suit, moving through the room with calm gravity. Hospital security stepped aside. The CEOR Richard Caro followed behind him, red-faced, flustered. And in front of them, Malcolm, holding a sealed envelope. The kind you only bring when you want the world to stop pretending it doesn't know who's in the room. Simone exhaled slowly and set down her napkin. The weight of silence had cracked. The room was about to shift. The envelope in Malcolm's hand wasn't large. It wasn't even flashy. But somehow, it pulled the gravity of the entire room toward it. He didn't raise it. He didn't wave it. He simply held it in his left hand, like it carried more than paper. And in truth, it did. It carried the weight of omission, of assumption, of 1,000 small indignities pressed into something undeniable. The CEO trailed a half step behind him, lips pressed into a line, his expression somewhere between confusion and dread. Richard Caro was a man who preferred optics over urgency. He liked donor photos and ribbon cuttings, not scenes. This, unfortunately for him, was a scene. Malcolm reached Simone's table in 10 steps. She hadn't moved. She didn't need to. He placed the envelope on the table, just beside her untouched water glass, and tapped it once with his fingers. Want to open it? He asked, voice calm. Simone looked at it for a moment, then at him. Then she turned to Caro. You knew I was coming tonight, she said. The CEO swallowed. Of course, we were honored. Her gaze didn't blink. Then why wasn't my name printed? Caro hesitated. The list was finalized before. I received the invitation 2 weeks ago. Yes, but my table was changed. There was a mix-up, and your staff tried to seat me next to the kitchen. The room had gone still. Not silent, but suspended. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses floated near lips but never touched them. The kind of pause people do when they want to pretend they're not listening. But every nerve is tuned in. Simone pushed her chair back. Not abruptly, not dramatically. She stood the way a surgeon stands before entering the OR calm, certain, sterile from performance. She picked up the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside, a certificate of donation. Not from the hospital, but from the Ellison Impact Foundation, a private fund tied directly to her and Malcolm. The donation had been submitted under a name only insiders knew. It had never been about attention. It had been about action. Also inside, a printed copy of the Pediatric Trauma Upgrade Blueprint, signed by Caro, with a handwritten note from the CFO. "Thank you for making this happen." Simone laid it all out on the table, smoothing each document with the back of her hand. "You received this, approved it, benefited from it." Caro said nothing. "You printed our name in the smallest font possible," Malcolm added, tucked beneath a heading titled Other Contributions. "But the grant funded the very equipment you're showcasing in that slideshow right now." Caro opened his mouth, but no words came. A woman near the center table muttered, "Oh my God." Simone's voice didn't rise. "The wing you're naming next month? That wouldn't exist if I hadn't stayed behind on Christmas Eve and recoded a pediatric patient in the hallway using expired equipment. Do you remember that? Because your son was in the bed next door." Now the silence dropped fully, like a curtain. Caro blinked, clearly trying to think faster than he ever had to in a room like this. "I didn't know," he said. Malcolm shook his head. "You didn't ask." Someone clapped. Just once. A single, reflexive clap from a table in the far back, where a few residents were seated. It was quickly silenced, but it was enough to ripple. Simone turned to the room, not to grandstand, but to be seen. "This isn't about ego," she said, "or recognition. I didn't come here to demand a plaque or a better chair. I came here to witness what would happen when my credentials weren't spoken out loud." She looked toward the central atrium, where candlelight flickered against curved glass. "You saw my skin before you saw my name, and then you saw my name, and still tried to find a smaller seat." A woman in a champagne-colored dress at a nearby table swallowed visibly. A man with graying temples lowered his eyes to his lap. Simone returned her gaze to Caro. "I don't need an apology," she said. "I need a reckoning." Then she sat. And just like that, the power in the room recalibrated. Caro nodded slowly. "You're right." He turned toward the mic. His voice wobbled slightly as he addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I owe you transparency. And I owe Dr. Ellison far more than that." He gestured toward the stage. "Please, if you'll join me." Simone didn't move. "I don't need a stage," she said. Caro faltered. Malcolm placed a steady hand on her shoulder. It wasn't permission. It was presence. Caro tried again. "The hospital will be..." But this time, it was Malcolm who spoke. "You don't get to fix this with optics," he said. "You fix it with structure, with policy, with the same urgency you give to your VIP suites and photo spreads." Caro looked around. His board members were no longer smiling. The CFO had vanished toward the exit. The gala had become a reckoning, and everyone in attendance would remember this night not for the wine pairings or the floral centerpieces, but for the woman they had nearly erased. Across the room, Dr. Thomas stood slowly. He wasn't a friend. He'd barely acknowledged Simone in 3 years. But he walked toward her now, awkwardly, his linen napkin still clutched in one hand. "Dr. Ellison," he said. She looked up. He hesitated. "I didn't know." She raised an eyebrow. "That seems to be a pattern tonight." He nodded. "It's no excuse, but I want to say thank you for the work you do, for the things I didn't see." Simone didn't offer absolution, but she nodded once. He returned to his table. A new server approached. Someone Simone hadn't seen before. She couldn't have been more than 22. Light freckles, wide eyes. She set a new glass of water on the table, this one chilled, with a lemon slice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of it." Simone looked at her for a long beat. "Don't apologize," she said. "Just stay." The girl nodded and left. The air in the Harrington Grand Hall didn't exactly warm, but it shifted, like someone had opened a window that had been sealed too long. The speakers returned to their seats. The string quartet resumed, but the music felt slower, more introspective. Simone reached for the envelope again, folded it neatly, slipped it into her clutch. "I'm done here," she said to Malcolm. He stood with her. As they turned to leave, Caro cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellison, before you go." She turned. Her eyes didn't harden. They just held. "We'll be naming the new wing in your honor," he said. Simone tilted her head. "Don't." Caro blinked. "Don't?" "Name it after the kids who don't get speeches," she said. "The ones whose parents fill out donation forms hoping someone will see their value before a tragedy makes it obvious." Then she walked, and Malcolm walked with her. No music followed them, no spotlight, just the awareness of everyone in the room that they had just witnessed something real. No performance, no revenge, just truth. As they reached the door, the same hostess from earlier stepped aside without a word. Her hands trembled slightly. Simone nodded at her once and stepped into the night. The next morning, the boardroom at Harrington Medical Center smelled faintly of espresso and engineered discomfort. Dr. Simone Ellison sat at the far end of the long glass table, her hands resting loosely on the portfolio in front of her. She wasn't in scrubs today, nor in anything particularly loud. A soft gray blouse, black slacks, no jewelry aside from her wedding ring, but in the sterile room of men in suits and women in blazers who had built their reputations around access and appearance. She was the only one who looked like she didn't come here to impress. She came here to inform. Across from her sat Richard Caro, his face carefully arranged somewhere between corporate regret and public relations readiness. To his right was a young assistant who had started typing the moment Simone walked in. To his left was Beverly Chen, CFO, whose expression hadn't changed since last night's gala guarded, sharp, calculating. A few board members joined by Zoom. Some cameras off. No one had touched the catered scones. Simone began simply. "No one's being sued," she said, flipping open the folder. "No press release will come from me. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for clarity." Someone exhaled across the table, relieved. Simone didn't look up. "However," she continued, "if you think that means I came here to be placated, you're not listening." Caro leaned forward. "Dr. Ellison, we deeply regret." She raised a hand. "I've heard your regret. I've read your statement. I've even skimmed the apology draft you sent to my personal email at 2:13 this morning." Someone on Zoom coughed. "What I haven't heard," she continued, "is a commitment, not a headline, not a tweet, not a vow to do better. A commitment, structural, permanent, enforceable." Caro sat back. Simone closed the folder and placed a single sheet on the table. It was a printed policy proposal. 5 points. Clear, bullet-pointed, and without fluff. Malcolm had helped her draft it at the kitchen table after midnight. He'd brewed decaf, sat across from her, and said, "Let's write it like you're designing a hospital you'd actually want to walk into." So she did. The first point. 1. Implementation of an anonymous guest experience audit system, reporting bi-weekly directly to the board, not to individual department heads. The second. 2. All seating assignments for internal events will be system-tracked, with full audit logs stored for 18 months. Any manual override will require executive-level approval with written justification. The third. 3. All hospital-hosted events shall include mandatory bias impact reviews by a rotating committee that includes junior staff, residents, and community representatives. The fourth. 4. Establishment of a Harrington Belonging Council, tasked with reviewing internal policies across departments from hiring to awards to seating charts. And the fifth. 5. A permanent reconfiguration of the Founders Gala seating structure, including the removal of hierarchy-based table assignments. Going forward, center seating will rotate among departments, junior doctors, nurses, and patient families. Caro stared at the page like it might bite him. Chen looked up finally. This is aggressive. No, Simone replied. It's necessary. What happened last night wasn't a failure of manners. It was a reflection of culture. This place doesn't need another dinner with a new name. It needs a new framework. Caro's assistant typed faster. Simone stood, slowly. I've spent my life mastering rooms designed to ignore me, she said. I've done it silently, respectfully, strategically, but I'm done adapting to a system that has no intention of adapting to me. She picked up her folder. And just so we're clear, if this isn't adopted within 30 days, I'll make the details of last night public. All of them. And not in anger. In detail. With receipts. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Caro, she added without looking back, you don't need to name anything after me. Just don't seat the next Simone by the kitchen. Then she walked out and left them to sit in the silence they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. That afternoon, Simone returned to her usual clinic shift. The same tiny office, the same overstuffed schedule, the same scuffed floor tiles that still hadn't been replaced. But something was different. Nurses stopped her in the hallway to say they'd heard what happened. A janitor nodded silently at her as she passed, a small smile tugging the edge of his lips. In the stairwell between floors, one of the new interns, an Indian-American woman named Priyakot, up to her, panting slightly. I just wanted to say thank you. Simone raised an eyebrow. For what? For not disappearing. That evening, Simone and Malcolm returned home to their quiet row house in Northeast D.C., where dinner was leftover lentil stew and half-warm cornbread. No press, no speeches. Just the silence of a kitchen where something powerful had already taken place. They didn't talk about the boardroom. They didn't need to. At 10:40, 1 p.m., Simone received a text. Caro, full proposal approved. Belonging Council will begin recruitment Monday. Audit system in progress. Official changes to gala policy effective immediately. She didn't reply. She turned the phone over and let the silence sit, not as burden, but as proof. 1 week later, a new staff memo went out hospital-wide. Subject: new policy changes, equity, culture, and belonging. At the bottom of the email was a simple line: policy inspired by internal leadership and community feedback. Special acknowledgement to Dr. Simone Ellison. She read it once, then deleted it, because she didn't need it stored. It was already written in the room. 3 months later, Harrington Medical Center hosted its first event under the new Seating Policia Scholarship Dinner for first-generation medical students. No VIP tables, no assigned zones. Simone walked into the hall, this time without an invitation in her hand. She was met by a young black man in a charcoal suit with a name badge that read, Devin Mitchell, Guest Relations Fellow. He smiled wide. Dr. Ellison, welcome. We've got you at table 2, unless you'd prefer table 7 closest to the stage. She looked around. The room buzzed with warmth. Laughter not forced. Chairs arranged in concentric circles, not ranked rows. Candles lit at every tablinot, just the center. She smiled. Anywhere's fine. Devin nodded. Well, we saved a spot beside a woman who just got into her first year at Howard Med. I think you'll like her. Simone walked slowly, scanning the room. Not because she didn't know where to go, but because this time, she was allowed to take up space. The next morning, someone from HR sent her a request. Would she consider serving as an inaugural co-chair for the Belonging Council? She declined, but nominated 3 nurses, 2 residents, and a patient advocate who had once written a handwritten thank you note after Simone stayed past midnight for a family consult. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the infrastructure. And it was happening. Quietly, deliberately, without applause. Just like she preferred. On the day the hospital formally unveiled the restructured atrium, including a seating area once referred to by staff as the soft exile section, a new brass plaque was placed on the back wall. just above the cushioned benches, beside a tall window looking over the healing garden. It didn't bear her name. It didn't need to. It read, "Reserved for those who will no longer be placed last." No signature, just presence. And that was enough. 6 months passed, and Harrington Medical Center began to hum a different frequency, quiet at first, almost imperceptible, like a radio dial drifting ever so slightly into tune. The changes didn't make headlines. There were no documentaries, no viral clips, just policies rewritten in silence and practices reshaped by new hands. They came in the form of better questions, better meetings, better seats. The old table map from the founders' gala had been taken down. The new map looked like a circle. And though most people didn't say it out loud, they all knew who was behind it. Simone never asked for that acknowledgement. She never walked into the break room expecting applause, never waited for thank yous in the hallway. Instead, she arrived early. She checked her residence notes. She stayed 10 minutes longer with the mother of a patient whose chemo wasn't working. She led by consistency, and the system slowly, carefully bent in her direction. One afternoon in late spring, Malcolm picked Simone up from the hospital after a long shift. She slid into the passenger seat, unbothered by the clipboard still in her lap. Her hair was pulled back in a low puff. No makeup. Her sneakers had blood spots near the toe from assisting in an unexpected ER trauma consult. He looked over at her. "Want to drive past it?" he asked. She blinked. "Past what?" He gave a tiny smile. "You'll see." He turned down the avenue behind the hospital, toward a side street where construction had recently finished on a new administrative building. The sun was setting behind it, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and the etched into brushed stone above the entryway was a name. The Ellison Room. Community Leadership. Patient Advocacy Wing. Simone didn't move. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't speak. Just stared. It wasn't flashy. No spotlights. No grand fountain. Just elegant lettering. A garden bench nearby, and glass doors that reflected the city skyline in their clean panes. Malcolm pulled the car over. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I think so." They sat for a while, letting the quiet settle. Then she opened her door. Inside, the space smelled like cedar and soft paint. It wasn't a wing for patients. Not directly. It was a space for conversations, town halls, training sessions, patient feedback forums, and staff innovation labs. The kind of room where the voices that usually came last now came first. A digital plaque on the inner wall lit up as they entered. "This room is dedicated to those who speak when silence would be easier. In honor of Dr. Simone Ellison, all who came before her." There was a photo, too. Not of Simone, of a patient. A young black girl in a hospital gown, laughing with her nurse over a coloring book. It was candid, unposed, real. Beneath it, a line read, "For every patient who wondered if their story mattered." Simone exhaled, her breath catching at the edges. Malcolm slipped his arm around her shoulder. She leaned into him, her temple brushing his chin. "I didn't want this," she said softly. "I know," he said, "but I'm glad it's not about me." He nodded. They stood like that for a while, woe people in a room built by their refusal to accept invisibility. A janitor passed them, nodded with a familiar kindness. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Over the next few months, the Ellison Room became something of a heartbeat. It wasn't always full, but when it was, it pulsed. It hosted a training on dismantling bias in emergency triage. It held a grief circle for nurses burned out by COVID. It gave space to interns from backgrounds that had never made the holiday newsletter before. One evening, Simone stood in the back of the room, watching a group of high school students from the city's mentorship program ask questions about becoming doctors. One girl raised her hand. "Is it true you have to know someone to get in?" A third-year resident named Jamie, who'd grown up in public housing in Southeast DC, replied, "It's not about who you know anymore. It's about what you walk in with. Simone smiled faintly. Later that night, she wrote that quote on a sticky note and placed it in her locker. What you walk in with. Harrington didn't become perfect. Some meetings still started with the same old power dynamics. Some administrators still defaulted to the same tired hierarchies. But more and more, someone would pause and say, "That's not how we do it anymore." And when they said it, they were thinking of Simone even if her name never left their lips. The following fall, a young black resident named Jordan Williams sat in the staff lounge reading a newspaper article about the national rise of equity-centered hospital leadership. One paragraph mentioned Harrington's Belonging Council as a model. He looked up. "Did y'all know our hospital got featured in The Atlantic?" Someone nodded. "Because of Ellison, right?" Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Like the building?" Another resident laughed. "No, like the woman." He turned the page. "I thought that was just a name." Simone walked in right then, carrying a stack of charts. Jordan glanced up. "Oh, hey, Dr. Ellison." She smiled. "Hey, Jordan." He held up the paper. "Did you see this?" She gave it a quick glance. "Looks like a slow news day." He chuckled. "It says we're a model for quiet, structural change." Simone shrugged. "Sounds about right." Then she walked out. A few days later, Simone received a handwritten note in her office mailbox. No return name, just clean lettering. "You don't know me, but I'm a nurse now because of what you did. My mother was a patient at Harrington when I was 16. I remember how you looked her in the eye when others looked away. Thank you. For sitting in rooms you didn't want to, so I could be invited into them later." There was no signature. Simone folded the letter and placed it in the back pocket of her journal. She didn't need to know who sent it. She knew the weight of that kind of sentence. She'd carried it once herself. The next Founders Gala happened almost exactly a year later. The table layout had changed. Now, each table bore the name of a patient success story. No donors, no departments, just people. Simone walked in quietly. No valet, no spotlight. This time, a young woman in guest services greeted her with a clipboard. "Dr. Ellison, welcome back. You're at table 9, Amir's story. Would you like someone to walk you?" Simone smiled. "No, thank you. I know the way." She walked through the room, past tables of nurses, patients, translators, residents, interns. No one looked at her like she didn't belong. They just looked and saw. Later that night, after the last dish was cleared and the lights dimmed, Simone returned to the Ellison room to gather materials for a morning seminar. The building was empty, the lights motion-activated. As she stepped inside, the glow of the hallway followed her. She paused near the wall with the dedication plaque. Someone had left a single white lily in a glass of water beside the bench. No note, no ribbon, just a flower. Simone sat on the bench, listened to the hum of the HVAC, the quiet sound of change that no one ever records. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself exhale not from tension, not from exhaustion, but from release. The room didn't bear her name because she asked for it. It bore her name because she showed what it meant to earn space without asking for permission. That was her legacy. Not the flower, not the plaque, the silence, and what she made of it. Sometimes, the loudest change doesn't come from microphones or headlines. It comes from the quiet decision to stay in the room, even when everything around you says you don't belong there. Simone never shouted. She never demanded a spotlight. She simply stood her ground and let her presence rewrite the rules. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to be reminded. Dignity doesn't require permission. It only needs one person brave enough to sit, even by the service door, and say, "This isn't where my story ends." Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments what moment in your life taught you the quiet power of being seen. And remember, the room didn't bear her name because she asked for it. It bore her name because she showed what it meant to earn space without asking for permission. Stay tuned.